To do this deep dive for all of us listening to try and make some sense of it.
Absolutely. And remember those we lost, most importantly.
A nighttime training mission, and then to collide with a commercial airliner like that.
It's almost unfathomable.
So let's just take a minute, just a minute,
Yeah.
and remember those 3 soldiers on that Black Hawk helicopter.
Captain Rebecca Lobach, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Andrew Eves, and Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hara.
We should learn a bit about who they were, what their lives were like.
I think what gets me about Captain Lobach, besides her being such a skilled pilot with all those flight hours,
Yeah.
she was also a certified victim advocate.
Wow.
And she wanted to be a doctor, a physician.
Really?
It shows just how much she cared about helping people,
Yeah.
even outside of her military service. It's amazing.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the good she would have done.
It really is.
And Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eves, he was in the Navy for like a decade before joining the Army.
A decade. That's incredible.
So that meant something to him, aviation and serving his country.
Absolutely. And Staff Sergeant O'Hara, he'd even been deployed to Afghanistan, knew everything about keeping those helicopters in perfect shape.
Wow, essential work.
He made sure pilots like Eves were safe,
So important.
Each of those soldiers had a whole life, a story.
Full of purpose, I'd say.
And it's not just their families who are hurting.
No, not at all.
It's a loss the whole country feels. Right? It makes you remember the sacrifices they all make,
Definitely a heavy reminder. And while we're feeling this, we have to also try to understand what happened that night.
Try to piece it together.
We know the soldiers were part of the 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir.
Okay, right.
And they were on that training mission in the UH-60 Black Hawk.
Right, nighttime training. And the collision was around 9 p.m. with an American Airlines, a Bombardier CRJ 700.
A lot of investigations going on, I imagine, trying to figure this out.
Oh, absolutely. The NTSB, the FAA, even the Army, they're all involved.
Must be a lot to figure out.
It's a complicated thing, lots to think about. We got to remember these investigations. They take time.
Right, of course.
And they need to be really thorough.
I bet there's pressure, though, to get answers fast, so especially when it's such a big tragedy.
You're right, there is. One thing that makes this so tough to investigate is just nighttime flying itself.
Oh, of course.
Much harder than daytime.
I can imagine.
Visibility is limited. Pilots have to depend way more on instruments.
Must make it extra hard for the investigators, huh?
It does. And then there's all the air traffic control around Reagan National. Such a busy airport.
Oh, yeah. Trying to direct a whole symphony in the dark, practically.
That's a great way to put it. So much information, and it's easy for things to get mixed up.
Right. Miscommunication, all that.
Yeah. And we've already got those reports about the altitude readings, the conflicting ones.
Yeah, I remember seeing those.
And then you have President Trump's statements early on about the helicopter's altitude.
I remember that, too.
But we really got to be careful not jumping to conclusions. These are early findings.
Of course, yeah.
It's just way too soon to say what really happened.
It makes sense that people would hold on to those first statements, though.
I get it, especially with how everyone's feeling.
Emotions are running high.
Exactly. That's why the investigations are so crucial. We need those facts, not just guesses.
So we can learn the right things from this, yeah.
Exactly.
Is there anything else about this crash, anything else that makes it hard to investigate?
Well, you also have to think about military training flights. They're different.
How so?
Those pilots, they're pushing their limits a lot of the time.
Right.
Practicing really tough maneuver.
In tough conditions, I bet.
Exactly. So it's not just the technical stuff of the crash, but also how it happened in that context,
Yeah, makes sense.
And then you add in the weather, how they were communicating with air traffic control, maintenance records for both planes.
So many pieces.
Like a giant puzzle, yeah.
What do you think are the biggest questions they're trying to answer, the investigators, I mean?
Well, what each pilot saw, what they did in those last moments before the crash, that's key.
Makes sense.
They'll look at the radar, the black boxes, everything, to try and make a timeline.
A timeline, yeah.
So it's not about blame, really, but how it happened, step by step.
To prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. That's the goal, understanding every little thing that played a part.
It's almost like a reminder, even with all our technology,
Yeah.
flying is still risky.
It is, and even riskier for those military pilots, always pushing themselves.
Makes you think about how brave they are, knowing that, and still flying for their country.
Their bravery, their commitment, we should never forget that.
Absolutely. Makes you think about all the sacrifices they make every day.
It does.
We've talked a lot about how the investigation works, all the technical parts,
Yeah.
but I keep thinking about the people at the heart of it,
Absolutely. The human side of it.
the ones who died. the families who are grieving.
It's so important to remember that.
We'll talk more about that in just a bit.
Sounds good.
We'll be back to talk about Captain Lobach, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eves, Staff Sergeant O'Hara, and how their loss has impacted everyone.
I think that's important to do. Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all those details, the investigation, the technical stuff.
Yeah.
But we can't forget, these were real people.
People with their own hopes, dreams, families.
And now their lives are just gone.
We were talking before about Captain Lobach, how she wanted to be a doctor, and her work as a victim advocate.
It's just so sad to think about all that potential gone.
And Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eves?
Yeah.
He loved aviation so much.
Oh, yeah. Switching from the Navy to the Army just to fly the Black Hawk.
Shows how dedicated he was.
Absolutely. And then you have Staff Sergeant O'Hara making sure those helicopters were always ready.
Keeping everyone safe.
His expertise was crucial, absolutely vital.
Each of them, they had a whole life ahead of them. So much purpose.
And it's not just their families who are hurting, it spreads out.
To their friends, the people they served with.
The whole community, really.
It's a national tragedy. There's no other way to put it.
And while we're trying to figure out how this happened, I just keep thinking about each of their stories.
What they were thinking, feeling in those last moments, what their hopes were.
We'll never know, but it feels important to think about,
To remember them as more than just victims of a crash.
They were so much more than that. Real people with families, dreams.
And those families are the ones left to deal with this. It's unimaginable.
It's a heavy burden. It really is. And those investigations.
Yeah, they're necessary, but
they must make it harder, waiting for answers, trying to understand something that doesn't make sense.
I don't know how they do it.
And sometimes those answers, they never really come.
Even with the best investigation.
There can be questions left, things you just don't know, and it's got to be hard to live with.
It must take so much strength for those families, that community, to keep going.
It's amazing, really, the human spirit.
Finding hope, meaning even in the darkest times.
Makes you want to hug your loved ones a little tighter, Appreciate what you have.
It does. Life is fragile. We forget that sometimes.
These events, they remind us.
It brings us back to that question, what can we learn from this? How do we prevent it from happening again?
That's the big one, and the investigators, they'll be working on that.
But it goes beyond just the technical stuff, right?
Right. It's about recognizing how risky flying is, especially for the military.
Because they're always pushing the limits.
Exactly. We need better safety protocols, better training, better communication.
Looking at the whole system, everything that could be improved.
To create a culture of safety everywhere, from the pilots to the traffic controllers, the maintenance crews, everyone.
And learning from what's happened before, from other accidents.
Absolutely. There's so much history there. We have to study those cases, understand where things went wrong.
So we can apply those lessons, yeah.
Always evaluating, always improving, trying to get to zero accidents.
Even though we know that might be impossible.
It's worth striving for. Every life matters.
We've been talking big picture, but what about us, regular people? What can we do to honor their memory?
To make things safer? That's a great question. It starts with awareness. Knowing the risks, understanding what causes accidents.
So reading up, staying informed.
Following the news, the investigations, talking to our elected officials, demanding change.
Being active, not just passengers.
Exactly. Because ultimately, aviation safety, it's on all of us.
We're all part of the system.
And we can all make a difference.
That's a good point. We all have a responsibility here.
Yeah.
Wow, we've really gone deep on this one.
Yeah, we have.
From the crash itself, all the details, to these investigations, trying to figure it all out.
And the big picture, how to make flying safer.
It's been tough to talk about, honestly.
Sick stuff, yeah.
But important.
I think so, too.
As we wrap up, I keep thinking about legacy, what it all means.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the lives that were lost, the families, the investigations, hopefully we'll get some answers, some ways to prevent this from happening again.
Right.
But what about Captain Lobach, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Eves, Staff Sergeant O'Hara? How will they be remembered?
That's a good question. I think it's their service, how dedicated they were.
To their country, to each other.
And how they lived their lives. It's inspiring.
Their commitment to their duty, their fellow soldiers, their communities.
Yeah, we should all try to live like that.
And the work that's being done now to make flying safer, to learn from what happened.
Their sacrifice won't be forgotten.
It helps thinking about that.
And it's not just on the investigators or the people making the rules.
We all have a part to play, right? Like we talked about before.
Being engaged citizens, exactly.
Staying informed, holding our leaders accountable, supporting those groups, fighting for safer skies.
It's how we honor their memory. and make a real difference.
Even with a loss like this, so terrible, there's still hope.
There is a way forward.
And that's what we need to hold on to as we keep trying to understand this and move on.
I agree.
So to everyone listening, as we finish this deep dive, what will you do to remember Captain Lobach, Chief Warrant Officer 2Es, and Staff Sergeant O'Hara? How will you help make flying safer for everyone? Let's try to make a difference in their memory. Thank you for being with us through this tough conversation. We hope you learned something and maybe found a little bit of hope in all of this.